Close your eyes and let the centuries fall away like leaves in an autumn wind. The roar of modern traffic fades to silence, replaced by the clip-clop of horses on stone, the murmur of fountains, the distant voices of a city that once ruled the world. You are walking through ancient Rome, not the crumbling ruins that tourists photograph today, but the living, breathing capital of an empire that stretched from the misty shores of Britain to the sun-scorched sands of Egypt. The streets are paved with stones so precisely fitted that a coin cannot slip between them. Water flows through fountains fed by aqueducts stretching across mountains and valleys. Buildings rise around you that will still be standing 2,000 years from now, their engineering secrets so advanced that modern architects still study them and wonder. This is Rome at the height of its glory, a city of 1 million people, the largest metropolis the world had ever seen. A city of temples and tenements, palaces and public baths, circuses and sewers. A city built by engineers whose understanding of concrete, arches, and hydraulics would not be matched for over 1,000 years after the empire fell. Tonight, as you drift toward peaceful sleep, we will explore the engineering marvels of ancient Rome, the aqueducts and amphitheaters, the roads and harbors, the heating systems and construction techniques that made Roman civilization possible. Let your breathing slow and your muscles relax. The ancient stones have stories to tell, whispered secrets of genius and ambition preserved in brick and mortar across 2 millennia. Listen closely, and they will share their wisdom with you. Fact 1. The Romans were not the first great builders of the ancient world. The Egyptians had built their pyramids over 2,000 years before Rome rose to power. The Greeks had perfected the art of temple construction and created architectural orders still used today. The Persians had built vast palaces and connected their empire with royal roads. But the Romans did something different. They took the best ideas from every civilization they encountered and improved upon them, creating a new synthesis of engineering knowledge that would transform the ancient world. Roman engineering was not about individual monuments, but about systems, networks of roads and aqueducts and harbors that connected an empire and made it function as a single unit. Fact 2. The foundation of Roman engineering genius was concrete, a material the Romans did not invent but perfected to a degree unmatched until modern times. Roman concrete, called opus cementitium, was made by mixing volcanic ash called pozzolana with lime and seawater, then combining this paste with rocks and broken pottery. The resulting material could be poured into molds to create any shape, could set underwater, and actually grew stronger with age rather than weaker. Structures built with Roman concrete have survived for over 2,000 years, outlasting buildings made with modern Portland cement that begin to deteriorate after just 50 years. Fact 3. The secret of Roman concrete's durability was only recently discovered by modern scientists. When seawater mixed with the volcanic ash and lime, it created a chemical reaction that produced a rare mineral called aluminum tobermorite. This mineral formed within the concrete over time, actually reinforcing the structure at a molecular level. The Romans did not understand the chemistry behind their concrete strength, but they knew through centuries of experience that certain mixtures produced better results than others. This empirical knowledge, passed down through generations of builders, allowed them to create structures of remarkable durability. Fact 4. The Pantheon in Rome is perhaps the most spectacular demonstration of Roman concrete engineering. Built during the reign of Emperor Hadrian around 125 CE, the Pantheon features a dome that remains the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world, nearly 2,000 years after its construction. The dome spans 143 feet across and rises to the same height, creating a perfect hemisphere. At the top of the dome is an opening called the oculus, 27 feet in diameter, which provides the only source of light for the interior. Rain that falls through the oculus drains away through holes in the marble floor. Fact 5. The engineering of the Pantheon's dome demonstrates sophisticated understanding of structural forces. The concrete at the base of the dome is over 20 feet thick and made with heavy stone aggregate. As the dome rises, the concrete becomes progressively thinner and lighter, with the aggregate changing from stone to brick to volcanic pumice near the top. This careful gradation of weight reduces the stress on the structure and allows the dome to support itself without the need for internal supports. The Romans also incorporated relieving arches within the walls to direct forces downward and reduce the load on potential weak points. Fact 6. The interior of the Pantheon is decorated with coffers, the recessed panels that create a geometric pattern across the dome's surface. These coffers are not merely decorative, but serve an engineering purpose, reducing the weight of the dome without compromising its structural integrity. Each coffer represents concrete that did not need to be poured, lightening the load while maintaining the dome's curved shape. The combination of aesthetic beauty and engineering function is characteristic of the best Roman architecture, where form and structure work together seamlessly. Fact 7. Let yourself sink deeper into relaxation as we continue our journey through Roman engineering. Imagine standing in the center of the Pantheon, looking up at the oculus, that perfect circle of sky surrounded by the coffered dome. The light moves across the interior as the sun travels across the sky, a daily reminder of cosmic order in a space designed to honor all the gods. The building has stood for nearly 2,000 years, surviving earthquakes, floods, invasions, and the fall of the empire itself. It stands because its builders understood forces and materials with a depth that still impresses modern engineers. Fact 8. The arch was the fundamental structural element of Roman engineering, allowing builders to span openings much larger than was possible with simple horizontal beams. The Romans did not invent the arch, which had been used by earlier civilizations including the Mesopotamians and Etruscans, but they developed its potential to an unprecedented degree. By combining arches with concrete, the Romans could build bridges, aqueducts, and vaulted ceilings of enormous size and durability. The principle of the arch, which converts downward weight into outward thrust that is then absorbed by supporting structures, allowed Roman engineers to create spaces of unprecedented scale. Fact 9. The barrel vault, created by extending an arch along a straight line, was one of the most common Roman structural forms. Barrel vaults could cover rectangular spaces of considerable size, providing fireproof roofing for buildings that would otherwise require wooden beams vulnerable to fire. The Romans used barrel vaults for everything from warehouses and markets to bath complexes and basilicas. The interior of a barrel-vaulted space has a characteristic curved ceiling that directs forces outward to the supporting walls, requiring those walls to be thick and strong or buttressed to resist the outward thrust. Fact 10. The groin vault, created by intersecting two barrel vaults at right angles, was a more sophisticated structural form that allowed even greater flexibility in design. The groin vault concentrates forces at four corner points rather than along entire walls, allowing walls to be thinner and incorporating windows without compromising structural integrity. This innovation made possible the vast interior spaces of Roman bath complexes and basilicas, where natural light could flood in through clerestory windows while the roof was supported by relatively slender piers. The groin vault was a major step toward the soaring interiors of later Gothic cathedrals. Fact 11. The dome, the three-dimensional extension of the arch, was the crowning achievement of Roman vaulting technology. While earlier cultures had built domes, the Romans built them larger and more durably than ever before, using concrete to create shapes that would have been impossible with cut stone. The Pantheon's dome was the largest, but many other Roman buildings featured impressive domed spaces. The octagonal room in Nero's Golden House, the Domus Aurea, featured a dome with a hole in the center that reportedly rotated to shower guests with flowers and perfume. Roman dome technology would later influence Byzantine and Renaissance architecture. Fact 12. Roman roads were another engineering marvel that helped bind the empire together. At its peak, the Roman road network extended over 50,000 miles, connecting every province from Britain to Syria to Egypt. These roads were not mere dirt tracks, but carefully engineered structures designed to last for centuries and remain passable in all weather. The quality of Roman roads was so high that some stretches remained in use until the modern era, and the routes of many modern European highways still follow the paths laid out by Roman engineers 2,000 years ago. Fact 13. The construction of a Roman road began with surveying to establish the straightest possible route between destinations. Roman engineers preferred straight roads whenever terrain permitted, both for efficiency and for military purposes, as a straight road allowed soldiers to see farther and march faster. Once the route was established, workers dug a trench and filled it with layers of progressively finer materials, from large stones at the base to gravel and finally paving stones on the surface. The total depth of this construction could be 3 feet or more, creating a foundation that resisted both weather and heavy traffic. Fact 14. The paving stones of major Roman roads were typically large polygonal blocks of basalt or other hard stone, fitted together so precisely that the joints were almost invisible. The surface was crowned, meaning slightly higher in the center, so that rainwater would drain to ditches on either side rather than pooling on the road. The edges of the road were often lined with raised curbs to define the carriageway and prevent vehicles from running off the pavement. Milestones placed at intervals of 1 Roman mile, approximately 4,900 feet, told travelers how far they had come and how far they had to go. Fact 15. The Via Appia, begun in 312 BCE, was one of the first and most famous Roman roads, connecting Rome to the southern port of Brindisi on the Adriatic coast. Known as the Queen of Roads, the Via Appia demonstrated the engineering standards that would be applied throughout the empire. Parts of the original pavement are still visible today, the basalt blocks worn smooth by 2,000 years of feet and wheels, but still solid and functional. The Via Appia was not just a road but a monument, lined with tombs and memorials that proclaimed the glory of Rome to every traveler. Fact 16. Breathe slowly and let the rhythm of walking an ancient road lull you toward sleep. Imagine the sensation of smooth stone beneath your feet, worn by countless travelers before you. The road stretches straight ahead, lined with cypress trees and marble tombs, disappearing into the hazy distance. You can see for miles across the Italian countryside, the road a ribbon of civilization cutting through fields and forests. Somewhere ahead lies Rome, the city at the center of the world, drawing all roads toward itself like a great stone heart. Fact 17. Bridges were essential components of the Roman road network, allowing roads to cross rivers and ravines without interruption. Roman bridges were typically built with semicircular stone arches resting on massive piers sunk deep into the riverbed. The largest Roman bridges spanned hundreds of feet and rose high above the water, accommodating both normal river levels and seasonal floods. Many Roman bridges are still standing and still in use today, including the Pons Fabricius in Rome, built in 62 BCE and continuously used for over 2,000 years. Fact 18. The Alcantara Bridge in Spain, built in the early 2nd century CE, is perhaps the finest surviving example of Roman bridge engineering. Spanning the Tagus River in a deep gorge, the bridge features 6 arches, with the 2 central arches each spanning over 90 feet. The total length of the bridge is nearly 600 feet, and it rises 160 feet above the normal river level. An inscription on the bridge proclaims that it will last forever, and so far this boast has proven justified. The Alcantara Bridge survived centuries of warfare, floods, and deliberate attempts to destroy it. Fact 19. Roman engineers developed specialized techniques for building foundations in water. For bridge piers that needed to be sunk into riverbeds, they used cofferdams, temporary enclosures made of wooden piles driven into the riverbed and sealed with clay. Water was pumped out of the cofferdam using Archimedean screws or bucket chains, allowing workers to excavate the riverbed and lay foundations on solid ground. Once the foundation was complete, the cofferdam was removed and the pier was extended upward to support the bridge deck. This technique required precise planning and coordination, but produced remarkably stable foundations. Fact 20. The aqueducts of Rome were among the most impressive engineering achievements of the ancient world, carrying fresh water from distant springs and streams into the city across miles of countryside. At its peak, Rome was served by 11 major aqueducts delivering over 200 million gallons of water per day, more per capita than many modern cities provide. This abundant water supply fed public fountains, baths, and latrines throughout the city, making Rome one of the cleanest and most comfortable cities in the ancient world. The aqueducts continued to function for centuries, with some still supplying water to Rome today. Fact 21. The engineering principles behind Roman aqueducts were simple, but required precise execution. Water flows downhill by gravity, so an aqueduct needed a continuous slight downward slope from source to destination. The typical gradient was about 1 foot of drop for every 200 feet of horizontal distance, a slope so gentle that it is barely perceptible to the eye. Maintaining this precise gradient across miles of varied terrain required careful surveying and construction. The slightest error in gradient could cause water to pool or flow backward, rendering the aqueduct useless. Fact 22. Surveying instruments used by Roman engineers included the groma, a cross-shaped device for establishing straight lines and right angles, and the chorobates, a long wooden frame with a water-filled channel for establishing level. Using these simple instruments with skill and patience, Roman surveyors could plot courses across miles of countryside with remarkable accuracy. The Pont du Gard aqueduct in southern France, for example, drops only 54 feet over its 31-mile length, an average gradient of less than 1 inch per 100 feet. Achieving such precision over such distances was an extraordinary accomplishment. Fact 23. Most of a Roman aqueduct was not the spectacular arched bridge structure that we typically picture, but a covered channel running at ground level or underground. Only where the aqueduct needed to cross valleys or maintain its gradient above rising terrain were arched bridges constructed. These bridges, called arcades, were built with multiple tiers of arches to achieve the necessary height while distributing the weight efficiently. The visual drama of aqueduct bridges like the Pont du Gard comes from the engineering necessity of maintaining gradient across challenging terrain. Fact 24. The Pont du Gard in southern France is the best preserved and most spectacular Roman aqueduct bridge. Built around 50 CE as part of a 31-mile aqueduct supplying the city of Nîmes, The bridge rises 160 feet above the Gardon River on 3 tiers of arches. The lowest tier has 6 arches, the middle tier has 11 arches, and the uppermost tier, which carries the water channel, has 35 smaller arches. The entire structure was built without mortar, the massive limestone blocks held in place by their precise fitting and sheer weight. The Pont du Gard carried water for over 500 years before falling into disuse. Fact 25. Let yourself float now on a river of time, drifting past centuries of human achievement. The water that flowed through Roman aqueducts came from springs in distant hills, traveling for days through channels of stone to reach the thirsty city. It filled fountains where children played and baths where philosophers debated. It turned the wheels of mills that ground grain into flour. It washed through sewers that kept the streets clean. Water was the lifeblood of Rome, and the aqueducts were the arteries that carried it. Even today, water from the ancient Aqua Virgo still flows into the Trevi Fountain in the heart of Rome. Fact 26. Inside the city, water from the aqueducts was distributed through an elaborate network of lead and ceramic pipes. Large settling tanks called castella allowed sediment to settle out of the water before it entered the distribution system. From these tanks, pipes carried water downhill to fountains, baths, and wealthy private homes. The Romans understood that water would rise to its own level, allowing them to supply upper floors of buildings from pressurized pipes, though most water was delivered to ground-level outlets. The constant flow of water through public fountains ensured that fresh water was always available and kept the system from stagnating. Fact 27. The use of lead pipes in Roman water systems has sometimes been cited as a cause of lead poisoning among the Roman population. However, studies of Roman skeletons suggest that while lead levels were elevated compared to modern standards, they were not high enough to cause widespread acute poisoning. The constant flow of water through the pipes prevented significant lead absorption, and the limescale that accumulated inside the pipes created a barrier between the water and the lead. While some lead exposure certainly occurred, it was probably not a major factor in Rome's decline as has sometimes been suggested. Fact 28. Roman fountains were not merely decorative, but served essential functions. In a city where most people lived in cramped apartment buildings without running water, public fountains were the primary source of water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning. Fountains flowed continuously, day and night, with excess water running into drains that flushed the sewers. The sound of splashing water was constant throughout the city, a background music that Romans would have taken for granted. When the aqueducts were cut during sieges, the silence of the fountains signaled mortal danger. Fact 29. The public baths of Rome, called thermae, were among the most elaborate and popular public buildings in the ancient world. These vast complexes combined facilities for bathing, exercising, socializing, and intellectual pursuits in architecturally spectacular settings. The largest thermae could accommodate thousands of bathers simultaneously and featured gardens, libraries, lecture halls, and shops in addition to the bathing facilities themselves. Entrance fees were minimal or waived entirely, making the baths accessible to all but the poorest Romans. For many Romans, the daily visit to the baths was the highlight of the day. Fact 30. The bathing sequence in Roman thermae typically began in the tepidarium, a warm room where bathers would acclimate to the heat and apply oil to their skin. From there, bathers proceeded to the caldarium, a hot room with a heated pool, where they would sweat and have the oil and dirt scraped from their skin with curved metal tools called strigils. Finally, bathers would cool off in the frigidarium, a cold room with an unheated plunge pool. This progression from warm to hot to cold was believed to have health benefits and was certainly refreshing after a day's work. Fact 31. The engineering required to heat the enormous spaces of Roman thermae was remarkable. The hypocaust system, one of the earliest forms of central heating, circulated hot air from furnaces beneath raised floors and through hollow spaces in walls. The floors of heated rooms were supported on brick pillars called pili, creating a plenum space through which hot air and gases from the furnaces could circulate. The walls were lined with hollow tiles called teguli mamide that allowed the hot air to rise through vertical channels. This system could maintain comfortable temperatures even in the largest rooms. Fact 32. The furnaces that powered Roman hypocaust systems burned enormous quantities of wood, requiring sophisticated logistics to keep them supplied. The prefernium, or furnace room, was located below the level of the bathing rooms and was tended by slaves who worked in brutal conditions, feeding fires that burned day and night. The hot gases from the furnaces passed beneath the floors and up through the walls before exiting through chimneys. Some thermae had multiple furnaces serving different areas, allowing different rooms to be maintained at different temperatures according to their function. Fact 33. Rest now and feel the warmth spreading through your body like the gentle heat of a Roman tepidarium. Imagine yourself reclining on a marble bench, the floor warm beneath your feet, soft light filtering through high windows. The murmur of conversation echoes off the vaulted ceiling. Steam rises from heated pools. Attendants move quietly, offering towels and refreshments. For a little while, the cares of the world recede, and there is nothing but warmth and relaxation and the pleasant sensation of being clean. The Romans understood that civilization means more than survival. It means comfort, pleasure, and the refinement of daily life. Fact 34. The baths of Caracalla, built in the early 3rd century CE, were among the largest and most magnificent thermae ever constructed. The main bathing block covered over 5 acres and could serve 1,600 bathers at once. The complex included gardens, a stadium, libraries, and a vast exercise courtyard called a palestra. The interior was decorated with marble, mosaics, and statues of extraordinary quality. The ruins of the baths of Caracalla remain impressive today, but they convey only a fraction of the original splendor. When the aqueducts that fed the baths were cut in the 6th century CE, the complex was abandoned. Fact 35. The baths of Diocletian, built around 300 CE, were even larger than the baths of Caracalla, accommodating up to 3,000 bathers simultaneously. The main hall of the Frigidarium was later converted into the Church of Santa Maria degli Angeli e dei Martiri, designed by Michelangelo in the 16th century. This conversion preserved much of the original Roman structure, allowing visitors today to experience the scale of Roman bathing architecture firsthand. The enormous granite columns and vast vaulted ceiling of the church give some sense of the ambition and achievement of Roman engineers. Fact 36. The Romans did not limit their water engineering to supply. They were equally sophisticated in managing wastewater. The Cloaca Maxima, originally constructed to drain the marshy valley between Rome's hills, evolved into one of the world's first comprehensive sewer systems. This underground channel, some sections of which were large enough to admit a boat, collected wastewater from baths, latrines, and street drains and carried it to the Tiber River. The Cloaca Maxima was built with such skill that parts of it remain in use today, over 2,500 years after its initial construction. Fact 37. Public latrines in Rome were communal facilities where dozens of people could relieve themselves simultaneously while sitting side by side on marble or wooden seats above a continuously flowing water channel. While this arrangement would seem lacking in privacy by modern standards, Romans apparently thought nothing of it, using the latrines as social spaces where business could be discussed and gossip exchanged. A smaller channel in front of the seats provided running water for personal cleaning with sponges on sticks, the ancient equivalent of toilet paper. The continuous water flow kept the latrines relatively clean and odorless. Fact 38. Roman engineering excellence extended to the construction of harbors and ports that facilitated trade throughout the Mediterranean and beyond. The harbor at Portus, built under Emperors Claudius and Trajan to serve Rome, was one of the largest artificial harbors in the ancient world. Its construction required excavating millions of cubic feet of earth and stone to create a protected basin, building massive breakwaters to shelter ships from storms, and constructing warehouses, roads, and canals to move goods efficiently. The harbor at Portus made Rome's food supply more secure and helped maintain the city's enormous population. Fact 39. Roman engineers developed a remarkable material called hydraulic concrete that could set underwater, enabling the construction of harbor breakwaters and bridge foundations in conditions that would defeat ordinary building materials. This concrete, made with volcanic ash from the region around Pozzuoli near Naples, reacted chemically with seawater to form an extremely hard and durable material. Recent studies have shown that Roman maritime concrete actually grew stronger over time as seawater penetrated its structure and promoted the growth of interlocking mineral crystite. Some Roman harbor structures remain intact after 2,000 years of wave action. Fact 40. The construction of artificial harbors sometimes involved sinking ships filled with concrete to create breakwaters, a technique called opus pilarum. Large ships were floated into position, filled with concrete, and allowed to sink to the bottom, where they formed the core of massive stone and concrete breakwaters. This technique was used at Caesarea Maritima in Israel, where Herod the Great built one of the largest artificial harbors in the ancient Mediterranean. Archaeological investigations have revealed the remains of these sunken ships still embedded in the harbor works. Fact 41. Let the gentle rhythm of waves against ancient breakwaters soothe you now. Imagine standing on a Roman harbor wall as the sun sets over the Mediterranean, watching ships arrive from Egypt and Syria, from Spain and Gaul, bringing the wealth of the world to Rome. Amphorae of wine and olive oil, sacks of grain, bales of silk, crates of pottery and glassware. The harbor never sleeps, torches flickering through the night as stevedores unload cargoes that will feed and clothe the greatest city on earth. The empire flows through harbors like blood through a body, nourishing every limb with the products of every land. Fact 42. Roman cranes and lifting machines allowed the movement of enormous weights that would seem impossible without modern equipment. The treadwheel crane, powered by men walking inside a large wooden wheel, could lift loads of several tons to considerable heights. Multiple cranes working together could handle even heavier loads. The Romans also used compound pulleys to multiply the force applied to ropes, enabling relatively small teams of workers to lift massive stone blocks. These machines were essential for constructing the grand buildings and monuments that defined Roman architecture. Fact 43. The Colosseum, Rome's iconic amphitheater, demonstrates Roman engineering excellence on a massive scale. Built between 70 and 80 CE, the Colosseum could seat approximately 50,000 spectators in a structure that rose nearly 160 feet high. The exterior featured 3 levels of arched openings framed by engaged columns in the Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian orders, with a 4th level of solid wall at the top. The construction required an estimated 100,000 cubic meters of travertine stone, plus enormous quantities of concrete, brick, and marble. Fact 44. The sophisticated design of the Colosseum allowed it to be filled or emptied in minutes through an ingenious system of passages and stairways. 76 numbered entrances around the perimeter led to stairways that distributed spectators to their designated seating areas. Each ticket specified an entrance number and section, allowing crowd control that prevented congestion and ensured that different social classes were kept separate. The vomitoria, the passages through which crowds spewed out at the end of events, could empty the entire amphitheater in about 15 minutes. Fact 45. The hypogeum beneath the arena floor of the Colosseum was a complex underground structure housing animals, gladiators, and elaborate stage machinery. A network of tunnels and chambers extended beneath the entire arena, with cages for wild beasts, rooms for gladiators to wait before combat, and storage for props and scenery. A system of elevators and trapdoors allowed animals and fighters to be raised dramatically into the arena at unexpected moments. The hypogeum was covered by the wooden arena floor, which was in turn covered with sand to absorb blood and provide footing. Fact 46. The velarium was a massive retractable awning that could be extended over the Colosseum to shade spectators from sun and rain. This enormous canvas cover was supported by wooden masts extending from brackets at the top of the outer wall and was operated by a detachment of sailors from the Roman navy. Managing such a large sail in the variable winds of the city required nautical expertise, and the velarium could reportedly be adjusted to shade different sections as the sun moved across the sky. The technology to create such a large, functional retractable roof was lost after the fall of Rome. Fact 47. The engineering of the Colosseum included provisions for flooding the arena for naval battles, though this was apparently only done in the early years before the hypogeum was constructed. Channels connecting to aqueducts could fill the arena with several feet of water, allowing miniature warships to stage battles for the entertainment of the crowd. The logistics of waterproofing the arena and filling it quickly enough to maintain audience interest must have been challenging. After the hypogeum was built, naval battles were staged at separate purpose-built venues called naumachia. Fact 48. Drift deeper now into peaceful rest, letting the images of ancient Rome fade into soft focus. The stones that witnessed chariot races and gladiatorial combat, the water that flowed through fountains and filled the baths, the roads that carried legions to the ends of the earth, all of it is still there, beneath the modern city, around the corner from tourist shops, hidden in plain sight. 2,000 years of history layers beneath your feet whenever you walk in Rome, the engineering achievements of generations preserved in brick and stone and concrete. Fact 49. Roman military engineering was as impressive as civilian construction, with legions capable of building fortified camps, bridges, and siege works with remarkable speed and efficiency. Every Roman legion included specialists in construction along with soldiers trained in basic engineering tasks. When on campaign, legions built a fortified camp every night, complete with ditches, ramparts, and palisades, only to tear it down the next morning and march on. This discipline ensured that Roman armies were never caught unprotected and could hold ground against any opposition. Fact 50. The siege works at Masada in Israel demonstrate Roman military engineering at its most determined. When Jewish rebels took refuge atop this isolated desert plateau in 73 CE, Roman engineers built a massive siege ramp from the valley floor to the plateau top, a task requiring the movement of thousands of tons of earth and stone. The ramp still exists today, a testament to Roman engineering capability and military persistence. The Romans would invest whatever effort was necessary to achieve their objectives, whether building roads across mountains or ramps up cliff sides. Fact 51. Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain was the largest construction project undertaken in the Roman Empire's European provinces. Stretching 73 miles from coast to coast across northern England, the wall was built of stone and turf, with a fortified gate every Roman mile and watchtowers between gates. The wall was fronted by a deep ditch and backed by a military road, and another ditch marking the military zone. Construction required moving millions of tons of stone and employed thousands of soldiers and laborers over several years. Much of the wall still stands today, nearly 1900 years after its construction. Fact 52. The Roman army's engineering capabilities allowed it to project power across rivers that would have stopped less technically capable forces. Caesar's engineers famously built a timber bridge across the Rhine River in just 10 days in 55 BC, demonstrating to Germanic tribes that the river was no barrier to Roman arms. The bridge was a sophisticated wooden structure resting on piles driven into the riverbed, wide enough for an army to cross and strong enough to support cavalry and supply wagons. After achieving his military objectives, Caesar had the bridge dismantled, leaving the barbarians to contemplate what Rome could do. Fact 53. Roman engineers developed specialized siege equipment, including battering rams, siege towers, and artillery pieces capable of hurling stones and bolts with considerable force and accuracy. The ballista was a torsion-powered weapon similar to a giant crossbow, capable of shooting bolts with enough force to penetrate shields and armor at hundreds of yards. The onager, named for the wild ass because of its powerful kick, was a catapult that could throw heavy stones to smash walls and terrify defenders. These weapons required engineering skill to construct and maintain, and their effectiveness gave Roman armies advantages in siege warfare. Fact 54. The precision and consistency of Roman engineering were enabled by standardization. Roman measurements were uniform throughout the empire, allowing plans drawn in Rome to be executed in Britain or Syria without confusion. Building techniques and materials were similarly standardized, with bricks and tiles manufactured to consistent sizes that could be used interchangeably. This standardization was maintained through written manuals, particularly the architectural treatise of Vitruvius, which compiled Roman knowledge of construction and has influenced Western architecture ever since. Fact 55. Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century BC, produced the only surviving complete architectural treatise from classical antiquity. His 10-volume work De Architectura covered building materials, temple construction, public and private buildings, water supply, astronomy, and machines. Vitruvius insisted that architecture must exhibit 3 qualities: firmitas, utilitas, and venustas, or structural soundness, useful function, and beautiful appearance. These principles continue to guide architects today, though sometimes honored more in the breach than the observance. Vitruvius's work was rediscovered during the Renaissance and profoundly influenced the revival of classical architecture. Fact 56. Rest in this moment of perfect stillness, letting your thoughts drift like clouds across an evening sky. The knowledge of the ancients has never been truly lost, only forgotten and rediscovered, buried and excavated, translated and transformed across the centuries. The same principles that allowed Roman engineers to span valleys with aqueducts and cover vast halls with concrete domes still govern how buildings stand and water flows. Engineering is humanity's accumulated wisdom about how to work with the forces of nature rather than against them. Fact 57. The Circus Maximus was the largest venue for public spectacles in ancient Rome, capable of holding an estimated 250,000 spectators for chariot races and other events. The elongated oval of the track stretched nearly 2,000 feet, with seating rising in tiers around both long sides and one curved end. The spina, the central barrier around which the chariots raced, was decorated with obelisks, statues, and 7 large eggs and dolphins that were used to count the laps. The Circus Maximus hosted races and festivals for over 1,000 years, from the early Republic through the fall of the Western Empire. Fact 58. The engineering of the Circus Maximus required managing enormous crowds, providing good sightlines from all seats, and creating a track surface suitable for high-speed chariot racing. The seats were supported on arch substructures that distributed the weight of the crowds and provided passageways for spectators to reach their seats. The track surface was carefully maintained sand, packed hard enough for chariot wheels, but soft enough to cushion falls. The starting gates, called carceres, were angled to compensate for the curved starting line, giving each chariot an equal distance to the first turn. Fact 59. Roman theaters, derived from Greek models, but with significant innovations, were engineering achievements that combined excellent acoustics with comfortable seating for thousands of spectators. Unlike Greek theaters built into hillsides, Roman theaters were often freestanding structures with their seating supported on arched substructures. This allowed theaters to be built on flat ground in any location. The scaena frons, the elaborately decorated permanent backdrop, reflected sound toward the audience and created a visual frame for performances. Some Roman theaters included velaria similar to those of amphitheaters, shading the audience from sun and rain. Fact 60. The Theater of Marcellus in Rome, built by Emperor Augustus and still partially standing today, provided the model for the Colosseum's exterior design. Its semicircular form, with multiple levels of arched openings separated by engaged columns, established an architectural vocabulary that would be repeated throughout the empire. The theater held between 11,000 and 20,000 spectators, who entered through multiple vomitoria that allowed the building to fill and empty efficiently. The surviving structure was converted into a palace during the medieval period, which helped preserve it when other ancient buildings were being demolished for their stone. Fact 61. Roman insulae, the multi-story apartment buildings that housed most of Rome's population, were engineering solutions to the challenge of accommodating 1 million people within the city's limited area. These buildings typically rose 3 to 5 stories, though some reached as high as 8 or 9 stories before regulations limited their height. Construction was typically concrete and brick, with wooden floors and stairs. Ground floors often housed shops and workshops, with residential apartments above. Most insulae lacked running water and private toilets, and fire was a constant danger given the wooden construction and open flames used for cooking and lighting. Fact 62. The engineering challenges of multi-story construction included ensuring adequate foundations, managing the loads of upper floors, and providing stairs and passages for circulation. Roman builders addressed these challenges with varying degrees of success. The worst insulae were poorly built death traps, prone to collapse and fire. The best were comfortable residences that offered urban convenience and community. Building regulations established after major disasters attempted to impose construction standards, including limits on building height and requirements for fire breaks between buildings. Enforcement of these regulations was often lax. Fact 63. Elite Romans lived in single-family houses called domus, which were organized around central courtyards and featured amenities unavailable in insulae, including running water, private baths, and elaborate decoration. The typical domus was oriented inward, presenting a blank wall to the street and opening onto the atrium, a central hall lit by an opening in the roof. Beyond the atrium lay the peristyle, a garden surrounded by a columned portico. Rooms of various functions opened off these central spaces, their size and decoration reflecting the owner's wealth and status. Fact 64. Let yourself drift now into dreams of ancient houses, imagining the cool shade of a Roman peristyle garden in the heat of a summer afternoon. Water splashes in a central fountain, surrounded by flowers and herbs. Columns cast long shadows across mosaic floors. The sounds of the city are muffled, distant, the thick walls creating an oasis of quiet in the urban noise. Frescoes on the walls depict gardens and landscapes, creating the illusion of windows opening onto infinite vistas. This is the private Rome, hidden behind walls, where families lived and loved and sheltered from the storms of history. Fact 65. Roman floor mosaics demonstrate both artistic sophistication and engineering skill. Created from thousands of tiny stone or glass tesserae set in mortar, mosaics could depict anything from simple geometric patterns to elaborate pictorial scenes. The most impressive mosaics use tesserae of different colors to create detailed images, sometimes including effects of shading and perspective. Creating such mosaics required both artistic vision and technical skill, as well as careful preparation of the floor surface to ensure that the mosaic would remain stable and level. Many Roman mosaics have survived remarkably intact, protected by the earth that buried them. Fact 66. Roman wall paintings, preserved at sites like Pompeii and Herculaneum, show techniques including fresco, where pigments were applied to wet plaster and bonded chemically with the wall as it dried. Fresco painting required careful planning, as the artist had to complete each section before the plaster dried. The results, however, were remarkably durable, with colors remaining vivid after 2,000 years of burial. The subject matter of Roman wall paintings ranged from architectural fantasies, creating illusions of space, to mythological scenes to still-life compositions of food and flowers. Fact 67. The preservation of Pompeii and Herculaneum, buried by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 CE, provides an unparalleled window into Roman daily life and construction techniques. The volcanic ash and mud that buried these cities also preserved them, protecting fragile materials like wood, food, and textiles that normally decay. Excavations have revealed not just public buildings and elite houses, but shops, taverns, workshops, and modest homes, giving a complete picture of Roman urban life. Even graffiti survives on the walls, recording the thoughts and desires of ordinary Romans. Fact 68. The water systems of Pompeii, though smaller in scale than Rome's, demonstrate the same engineering principles. Water from a branch of the Aqua Augusta entered the city through a main distribution tank, from which lead pipes carried it to public fountains, baths, and private homes that paid for the privilege. The streets of Pompeii featured stepping stones that allowed pedestrians to cross without stepping in water and waste that flowed in channels down the middle of the street. These stepping stones were positioned to allow wagon wheels to pass between them. Fact 69. Roman glass production achieved levels of quality and output not matched again until the modern era. Glass blowing, invented in the 1st century BC, allowed rapid production of glass vessels of many shapes and sizes, making glass affordable for ordinary Romans rather than a luxury for the elite. Roman glassmakers also produced flat glass for windows, bringing natural light into buildings that would otherwise have been dark. Window glass was typically greenish and somewhat irregular, but it served its purpose of admitting light while blocking wind and rain. Fact 70. Roman metalworking extended far beyond military equipment to include sophisticated machinery and precision instruments. Water mills for grinding grain were widespread throughout the empire, representing an important step toward mechanized production. The Romans also used water power for sawing stone and wood, fulling cloth, and crushing ore. Complex mechanisms, including geared devices for astronomical calculation and automata powered by steam or water, demonstrated engineering capabilities that would not be recovered for over a millennium after Rome fell. Fact 71. Breathe deeply and let the achievements of the ancient world fill you with quiet wonder. The Romans did not have electricity or computers, internal combustion engines, or synthetic materials. They had stone and brick, wood and metal, water and fire, and human muscle. With these simple resources and their accumulated knowledge, they built an empire that lasted for centuries and left monuments that endure for millennia. What they achieved should humble us and inspire us. If they could do so much with so little, what might we accomplish with all that we have? Fact 72. Roman timekeeping relied primarily on sundials and water clocks, as mechanical clocks had not yet been invented. Sundials marked the passage of hours during the day by the movement of shadows cast by the sun. Water clocks, or clepsydry, measured time by the regulated flow of water from one vessel to another, allowing time to be tracked during the night or on cloudy days. Roman hours were not of fixed length, but varied with the season, with daytime divided into 12 hours regardless of actual length. Fact 73. The Roman calendar, reformed by Julius Caesar in 46 BCE, established the basic framework still used today. The Julian calendar featured 12 months, with most months containing 30 or 31 days and February containing 28 days except in leap years. The 7-day week, adopted during the imperial period, was named for celestial bodies that became the names we still use, with Sunday for the sun, Monday for the moon, and so forth. This reformed calendar was so accurate that it remained in use until the minor adjustments of the Gregorian calendar in 1582. Fact 74. Roman surveying instruments allowed engineers to measure angles, establish right angles, and determine levels with considerable precision. The groma, consisting of 2 perpendicular crossarms from which plumb lines hung, allowed surveyors to sight along straight lines and establish right angles for laying out buildings, roads, and agricultural plots. The chorobates, a long wooden table with a water-filled groove for establishing level, was used for projects requiring precise gradients, such as aqueducts. These simple instruments, used with skill and care, enabled the accurate construction of vast engineering works. Fact 75. The planning of Roman cities followed standardized patterns that reflected military camp layouts. Streets were organized in a grid pattern, with 2 main thoroughfares, the Cardo running north-south and the Decumanus running east-west, crossing at the center of the city. The Forum, the civic center of commercial, religious, and political activity, was typically located near this central crossing. Public buildings, including temples, basilicas, and baths, were arranged around the Forum, with residential areas filling the blocks defined by the grid of streets. Fact 76. The regular grid of Roman cities facilitated the provision of services, including water supply and drainage. Pipes could run beneath streets to reach all blocks efficiently. Storm drains could collect water from streets and channel it out of the city. The organization of the city into distinct blocks, called insulae, simplified property boundaries and taxation. This rational approach to urban planning contrasted with the organic growth of cities that developed without central planning, and Roman colonial cities are still recognizable by their regular layouts. Fact 77. Rest now in the quiet of an ancient night, when the streets of Rome fell silent and the stars wheeled overhead as they have for billions of years. The engineering achievements of the Romans were products of human minds working within human limitations, finding solutions to problems that humans still face today. How do we bring water to cities? How do we span rivers and valleys? How do we create comfortable shelter from heat and cold? The Romans asked these questions and answered them with stone and concrete and bronze. Fact 78. Roman bridges, roads, and aqueducts required ongoing maintenance to remain functional. A special official, the curator aquarum, was responsible for maintaining Rome's water supply system, with a staff of several hundred workers. Road maintenance was assigned to various officials depending on the road's importance and location. Without regular attention, even the best-engineered structures would deteriorate. The decline in maintenance during the empire's final centuries contributed to the decay of infrastructure that had sustained Roman civilization. Fact 79. The fall of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE did not immediately erase Roman engineering knowledge, but the social and economic disruption that followed gradually undermined the capacity to maintain existing works and build new ones. Cities shrank, populations declined, and resources that had sustained large-scale construction were no longer available. Skills that had been passed down through generations of builders were lost as fewer buildings were constructed and fewer apprentices were trained. The great baths and aqueducts fell into ruin, their engineering secrets buried with them. Fact 80. The Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of Rome, preserved and developed Roman engineering traditions for another 1,000 years. Byzantine architects built the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople with a dome that was the largest in the world until the Pantheon's record was surpassed 1,000 years later. Byzantine engineers maintained and improved water systems, fortifications, and harbors throughout the eastern Mediterranean. When Constantinople finally fell in 1453, Byzantine scholars fled west, bringing knowledge that contributed to the European Renaissance. Fact 81. The Renaissance rediscovery of Vitruvius and the architectural achievements of ancient Rome sparked a revival of classical building techniques. Architects like Brunelleschi, who built the dome of Florence Cathedral by studying the Pantheon, and Palladio, whose classical villas became models for European and American architecture, consciously imitated and adapted Roman models. This classical revival has continued in various forms to the present day, with public buildings from the United States Capitol to countless courthouses and libraries drawing on Roman precedents. Fact 82. Modern engineering has rediscovered some Roman secrets while surpassing others. Studies of Roman concrete have revealed the chemistry that made it so durable, leading to efforts to develop modern concretes with similar properties. The Roman understanding of arches and vaults has been incorporated into modern structural engineering. At the same time, modern materials like steel and reinforced concrete allow spans and heights that the Romans could never have achieved. We stand on the shoulders of ancient giants while reaching higher than they ever could. Fact 83. The influence of Roman engineering extends beyond specific techniques to a basic approach to problem solving. The Romans were practical people who valued what worked over what was theoretically elegant. They adopted ideas from every culture they encountered and improved upon them through trial and error. They invested heavily in infrastructure because they understood that roads, bridges, and water systems created the foundation for prosperity and security. This practical, investment-oriented approach to engineering remains valuable guidance for societies seeking to build lasting civilizations. Fact 84. Let your mind rest now in the knowledge that human achievement is cumulative. What the Romans learned, they passed to the Byzantines, who passed it to the Arabs, who passed it to medieval Europeans, who passed it to us. Each generation adds something and loses something, but the overall trend has been toward greater knowledge and capability. The fact that you can turn on a faucet and have clean water flow endlessly is a legacy of Roman aqueduct builders and every engineer who followed them. The fact that you can drive on paved roads to any destination is a legacy of the Via Appia and every road builder since. Fact 85. The Appian Way, the Via Appia, can still be walked today, the original basalt paving stones worn smooth by 23 centuries of feet. On either side stand tombs of ancient Romans who wished to be remembered by the travelers passing their final resting places. The tomb of Cecilia Metella, a massive cylindrical mausoleum from the 1st century BCE, still dominates the landscape near the 5th milestone. Walking this ancient road, you walk in the footsteps of legions and emperors, merchants and pilgrims, travelers across 2 millennia who shared the experience of the journey. Fact 86. The infrastructure that the Romans built was never just about physical utility. Roads communicated Roman power and connected diverse peoples into a shared civilization. Aqueducts demonstrated mastery over nature and provided the water that made urban life pleasant. Public baths and theaters gave ordinary Romans access to amenities that improved their lives and fostered social cohesion. The grand scale of Roman engineering was intended to impress, to communicate the message that Rome could accomplish anything it set its mind to. Fact 87. The Roman engineering mentality combined ambition with practicality. Romans dreamed big dreams, planning roads that crossed continents and aqueducts that spanned valleys, but they also paid careful attention to details, knowing that great works are made of countless small decisions. The mason who cut each stone, the surveyor who sighted each line, the engineer who calculated each load, all contributed to achievements that no individual could have accomplished alone. Roman engineering was always collaborative, the product of organizations rather than solitary geniuses. Fact 88. As sleep approaches, let the lessons of Roman engineering guide you toward rest. The Romans built for the ages, creating structures designed to endure long beyond their makers' lifetimes. They understood that some achievements require patience, that great works take years or decades to complete. They invested in infrastructure that would benefit future generations, not just themselves. This long-term thinking, this willingness to build for a future they would not see, is perhaps the most important lesson Roman engineering has to offer. Fact 89. The Roman achievement was never guaranteed. The Republic struggled and fell into civil war. The empire rose and eventually fell. Other civilizations have accomplished great things and then collapsed, their achievements buried and forgotten. What made Rome's engineering legacy survive was partly luck, partly the durability of stone and concrete, and partly the decision of later generations to study and preserve what the Romans built. Heritage is not automatic. It requires conscious effort to maintain and transmit. Fact 90. The study of Roman engineering continues today, with archaeologists and engineers collaborating to understand how ancient works were built and how they have survived. New techniques including laser scanning, ground-penetrating radar, and materials analysis revealed details invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Each study adds to our understanding and raises new questions. The conversation between present and past continues as we try to understand what the Romans knew and how they knew it. Fact 91. Sleep now, and let the wisdom of the ages settle into your dreams. The Romans faced many of the same challenges we face today. How to build cities that are livable and sustainable. How to move people and goods efficiently. How to supply clean water and manage waste. How to create public spaces that bring people together. Their solutions were not perfect, but they worked for centuries. We can learn from their successes and their failures. Fact 92. The sound of water has been constant in Rome for over 2,000 years, splashing in fountains that have been renewed and rebuilt but never silenced. The Trevi Fountain, completed in 1762, is fed by the Aqua Virgo, an aqueduct built in 19 BCE that still functions today. When you throw a coin into the Trevi Fountain, you are participating in a tradition that connects you to 20 centuries of travelers who have passed through Rome. The water that catches your coin has traveled through channels designed by engineers who have been dust for millennia. Fact 93. The Tiber River flows through Rome as it has since long before humans built their first huts on the hills above its banks. The Romans built bridges across it, quays along it, and drains emptying into it. They tried to control its floods and harness its power. The river was there before Rome and will be there after, carrying water from the Apennine Mountains to the sea. All human achievements are temporary compared to the enduring features of the landscape. But temporary does not mean unimportant. Fact 94. Let your breathing slow to the rhythm of centuries passing. Empires rise and fall. Cities are built, destroyed, and rebuilt on their own ruins. Technologies are invented, lost, and reinvented. Through all the changes, humans continue to face fundamental challenges. Shelter, water, food, transportation, sanitation. The Romans developed solutions that worked for their time and place. We develop solutions for our time and place. Our descendants will develop solutions for theirs. The chain of problem-solving stretches across generations. Fact 95. The Pantheon's oculus remains open to the sky, as it has for nearly 2,000 years. Rain falls through it onto the marble floor and drains away through holes that the original engineers thoughtfully provided. The sun moves across the interior, marking the hours as it has since Hadrian's time. On the anniversary of Rome's founding, April 21st, the noon sun shines directly through the oculus onto the entrance, perhaps by design. The building is a calendar, a clock, and a monument to human capability. Fact 96. Somewhere beneath the streets of Rome, water still flows through channels built by engineers who worked under emperors whose names have become synonyms for power and excess. The Aqua Claudia, begun by Caligula and completed by Claudius, carried water for over 60 miles to reach the city. Portions of this aqueduct still stand in the countryside outside Rome, arches marching across the landscape like soldiers frozen in stone. Water no longer flows through all of them, but some still serve, after all these centuries, the purpose for which they were built. Fact 97. The lessons of Rome are lessons about building and maintaining. Creating infrastructure is expensive and difficult, but maintaining it is often harder. The Romans at their best understood this, investing in upkeep and improvement of their engineering works. When maintenance was neglected, as it was in the empire's final centuries, even the best-built structures began to fail. Infrastructure requires ongoing commitment. This is true for civilizations, and it is true for individuals. What we build, we must also maintain. Fact 98. As you drift into deeper sleep, carry with you this thought. The greatest engineering achievement is not any single structure or system, but the accumulated knowledge and capability that allows such works to be conceived and executed. This capability exists not in stones or concrete, but in human minds, in the skills passed from master to apprentice, in the texts preserved and studied, in the institutions that organize human effort toward common goals. Rome fell, but Roman engineering knowledge survived, adapted, and continues to influence the world we build today. Fact 99. Sleep well now, dreamer, surrounded by the invisible legacy of Roman engineers. The roads you travel, the water you drink, the buildings you inhabit, all owe something to those ancient problem solvers who looked at challenges and found solutions. Their monuments are crumbling now, but their ideas endure. The arch still distributes force. Concrete still sets hard. Water still flows downhill. The principles that Roman engineers discovered through trial and observation remain as true today as they were 2,000 years ago. In this continuity of knowledge, we find our connection to the past and our hope for the future. The whispers of Rome echo through the ages, soft now but never silent, carrying secrets that patient listeners can still hear. Close your eyes. The ancient city sleeps beside you. The fountains whisper. The stones remember. And in your dreams, you walk streets paved with the genius of generations, bathed in water that has traveled through mountains, sheltered by arches that have stood since before the memory of anyone living. Rome endures, and through Rome, something essential about human capability and aspiration endures with it. Rest now. The engineering marvels of the ancient world stand guard over your sleep, monuments to what humanity can achieve when we dream boldly and build well.